The hum of the third-floor server room never bothered Theodore Banks. He had learned to sleep through worse. That morning, Sandra Whitfield walked the length of the engineering floor with a visitor from the board behind her, and she found one of her senior engineers face down on his desk, one cheek pressed against a keyboard, a thin line of drool darkening the corner of a printed network diagram. She did not check the 4 empty energy drink cans beside his elbow. She did not check the timestamps on the terminal still glowing above his head, the ones showing he had been awake for 31 straight hours. She looked at the board member, then at the sleeping black man in the wrinkled shirt, and she said the words that would end her own career. This is exactly the kind of thing I'm cleaning up here. Pack your desk. You're done. Theodore opened his eyes. He did not yet understand what he had just lost, or what he had just saved. Let me take you back 6 days, to the Sunday night when none of this had happened yet. Theodore Banks was 44 years old, and lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, in a building where the elevator had been broken since March, and the stairwell smelled like other people's dinners. The second bedroom was not a bedroom. It was where his mother's things still sat in boxes, 11 months after the funeral, taped shut because he had not yet found the day where opening them felt survivable. He worked for Meridian Payment Systems, a company that processed transactions for hospitals, school districts, and a chain of pharmacies across 4 states. Most people had never heard of it. That was the point. Companies like Meridian lived in the wiring behind the world, in the half-second between a card swipe and an approval, and when they worked, no one thought about them at all. Theodore thought about them constantly. He had been at Meridian for 9 years, longer than almost anyone on the engineering floor, and in those 9 years he had built much of the architecture that kept the money moving. He knew the system the way a man knows the house he grew up in. He knew which walls were load-bearing and which ones had been patched over something rotten. That Sunday night, he made rice and beans on the stove because his mother had made rice and beans, and he ate standing up at the counter. And then he opened his laptop the way other men opened a beer. He was not on call. He checked the system anyway. He always checked. What he saw made him set down the fork. There was a settlement batch scheduled to run the following Saturday at midnight, a massive one. The quarterly reconciliation that swept across every client account, squared every ledger, and pushed the numbers to the banks. $500 million in transactions would clear in that window. Theodore had watched this batch run for 9 years. He could have set his watch by it, but the code that governed it had changed. Someone had pushed an update to the settlement engine 11 days earlier, and the update had altered the way the system handled what engineers called a rounding remainder, the fractions of a cent that pile up across millions of transactions and have to land somewhere. The old code swept them into a holding account. The new code did something Theodore had never seen. Under a specific condition, when a client account hit its credit ceiling at the exact moment the batch ran, the new code did not hold the remainder. It looped. It tried to settle the same fractional amount again and again, and the loop fed itself, and the numbers grew. On a small batch, it would do nothing. The condition would never trigger. But on the Saturday batch, with $500 million moving and at least 3 client accounts that Theodore knew sat right at their ceilings, the loop would catch. And when it caught, it would not just corrupt one transaction. It would cascade through the reconciliation, double settling, triple settling, writing phantom money into real accounts and pulling real money into nowhere, until the whole batch was a smear of numbers that matched nothing. The banks would reject it. The hospitals would not get paid. The school districts would bounce their payroll. The pharmacies would freeze. And Meridian, a company most people had never heard of, would be exposed as the reason none of it worked, with no clean ledger to prove what it owed to whom. Theodore sat with his cold rice and did the thing he always did. He checked his certainty before he raised an alarm. He pulled the changelog to see who had pushed the update. The author was listed as Kevin Mercer. Theodore knew Kevin Mercer. Everyone did. Mercer was 31, brought in 8 months ago from a consulting firm, and he had the kind of confidence that filled a room before he did. He wore the title of Principal Architect, a title that had not existed at Meridian until Sandra Whitfield created it for him. He gave presentations with slides that moved. He used the word legacy, the way a man flicks dust off a sleeve. And the legacy he meant was 9 years of Theodore's work. Theodore stared at the name. Then he did something he would replay in his mind many times in the days that followed. He did not email Mercer. He did not email Whitfield. He opened a private branch, copied the settlement code into a sandbox, and began building a simulation to prove the failure before he said a single word to anyone. Because Theodore Banks had learned a long time ago that a black man who raises an alarm without ironclad proof is not a man who caught a problem. He is a man who panicked. He is a man who does not understand the new system. He is a man with an attitude about the new architect. He would bring them the proof. He would bring them the whole thing, run and verified, so that there would be nothing to argue with. He gave himself until Saturday. The simulation was not simple. To prove the loop, Theodore had to reconstruct the exact conditions of the live batch inside a walled-off copy of the system, feed it real transaction volumes, and push 3 accounts to their ceilings at the precise microsecond the settlement engine swept them. One wrong variable and the simulation would run clean, and a clean simulation would be worse than no simulation, because it would tell them he was wrong when he was right. He started Monday. He told no one why he was staying late. Monday night he stayed until 11. The cleaning crew came through. A woman named Lupe, who he had known for years, and she emptied his trash and said, "You eat anything today, Mr. Banks?" And he said he would, and he did not. Tuesday he stayed until 1 in the morning and slept 4 hours and came back. The simulation was close. He had the loop triggering, but only intermittently, and intermittent was not proof. He needed it to catch every time, the way it would catch on Saturday, so that no one could say it was a fluke. It was Wednesday morning, running on 3 hours of sleep, that he made the mistake that would later look like the whole story. He needed test data that mirrored the real client accounts, and the only clean source was the production logging system. He pulled a read-only export. It was within his permissions. He had done it 100 times in 9 years, but the new monitoring software that Mercer had installed flagged the pull, and the flag went to Mercer's dashboard, and Mercer saw Theodore Banks accessing settlement data at 6 in the morning from a private branch he had not been assigned to. Theodore did not know he had been seen. Wednesday afternoon, Sandra Whitfield called him into her office. Whitfield was 51 and had been brought in as CEO 14 months earlier with a mandate from the board to modernize Meridian and prepare it for sale. She was not a cruel woman in the way that word is usually meant. She did not raise her voice. She had a daughter in college and a husband who taught high school chemistry and a habit of bringing donuts on Fridays. But she had built her entire identity on the idea that she was the one who saw clearly, who cut the dead weight, who dragged sleepy old companies into the future. And she had decided, within a month of arriving, that Theodore Banks was the past. She had decided it the way people decide these things, without ever saying it to herself in plain words. He was quiet. He did not present well. He wore the same 3 shirts. He had been there forever, and the forever clung to him. When Mercer talked, the future talked. When Banks talked, Whitfield found her attention drifting to her phone. "Ha, Theodore," she said. "I'm hearing you've been in the settlement code." "Yes," he said. "There's a problem with the Saturday batch. I'm documenting it. The settlement engine was rebuilt last month. Kevin's team did a full review. I know. The problem is in the rebuild. He watched her face do the thing he had watched 100 faces do. The slight withdrawal, the recalculation. She was not hearing an engineer report a defect. She was hearing an old employee attack the new architect's work. Kevin is the principal architect, she said. If there were a problem, he would have caught it. I'd like to show you, Theodore said. I'm building a simulation. I'll have it by Friday. If I'm wrong, I'll say so. But if I'm right, the Saturday batch fails and it takes the hospitals down with it. Whitfield looked at him for a long moment. Here was the door. She could have walked through it. She could have said, "Show me Friday." Instead, she said, "I want you to stop pulling production data. You're not assigned to settlement. If you have concerns, put them in an email to Kevin and let him evaluate them. Let Kevin evaluate them." The man who wrote the broken code would decide whether the code was broken. With respect, Theodore said, I'd rather show you directly. And with respect, Whitfield said, and now there was an edge. I'd rather you stay in your lane. We brought Kevin in to lead the architecture. I need you to support that, not undermine it. Theodore went back to his desk. He understood now that there was no clean path. If he emailed Mercer, the warning would die in Mercer's inbox, and on Saturday, the system would burn, and the email would prove only that he had been ignored. If he went over Mercer's head with nothing but a worry, he was the difficult old engineer who would not stay in his lane. The only thing that would survive in that building was proof so complete, it left no room for a person to choose not to see it. He had 2 days. That night, the cleaning woman, Lupe, found him still at his desk at midnight, and she did not ask if he had eaten. She set a foil-wrapped plate beside his keyboard, 2 tamales her sister had made, and she said, "Whatever it is not worth dying for." He thanked her. He ate 1 tamale. He kept the foil. He worked until 3, Thursday. The simulation caught the loop 4 times out of 5. Better, not enough. The 5th run, the clean one, haunted him. There was a variable he was not controlling, a timing jitter in the way the real system swept accounts that his sandbox was not reproducing. If he could not reproduce it, Mercer would point at the clean run and say the whole thing was noise. It was Thursday afternoon that Theodore caught the second thing. The thing that turned the story from a mistake into something with a shape. He went back into the changelog, looking for the original version of the settlement code so he could compare it line by line, and he found that the original version was gone, not archived. Gone. Someone had purged the version history on the settlement engine, leaving only the rebuilt code, so that there was no record of what the system used to do. An engineer purges history for one reason, so that no one can prove what changed. The purge was logged under Mercer's credentials 2 days after the rebuild. Theodore sat very still. He was no longer looking at a man who had made an honest error. An honest error you fix when it is pointed out. You do not erase the evidence of what the thing used to be. Mercer had not just broken the settlement engine. He had made it so that when it failed, no one could prove it had ever worked differently. The failure would look like it had always been there. It would look like 9 years of Theodore's architecture had been rotten all along, and the new team had simply inherited the rot. And then Theodore understood the rest of it. The way you understand the shape of a room when the light finally comes on. Whitfield was preparing Meridian for sale. A clean sale needed a clean story. The story was that the old system was decrepit, and the new team had modernized it. If the old system's history still existed, anyone doing due diligence could see that the architecture had run flawlessly for 9 years and broken only after the rebuild. Mercer had not erased the history to hide a mistake. He had erased it to protect the story, and the story was worth a great deal of money to the people selling the company. Theodore did not know how high it went. He did not know if Whitfield knew about the purge or only wanted the outcome it produced. He only knew that he was now the single person in the building who could prove that the system had ever been sound, and that he had until midnight Saturday before the proof became a catastrophe. He should have gone home Thursday night and slept. He knew it even then. But the clean simulation run was still mocking him, and he could not let it go, because a single clean run in the hands of a man like Mercer would undo everything. So he stayed. He chased the timing jitter through Thursday night and into Friday, and somewhere around 4 a.m. he found it, a microsecond delay in the way the production system handled account ceilings, and he wrote it into his sandbox, and he ran the simulation, and the loop caught. He ran it again. It caught. He ran it 10 times. It caught 10 times. Every run, the $500 million batch dissolved into a cascade of phantom settlements, exactly as it would on Saturday. He had it. He had the whole thing, the failure, the cause, and the timeline that proved the cause was the rebuild and nothing else. It was Friday, just before dawn. The batch would run in roughly 18 hours. Theodore had been awake for 31 of the last 33. He saved his work to 3 places, because a man who has seen version history purged does not trust a single copy. He saved it to the secure internal share. He saved it to an encrypted drive in his bag, and he emailed a complete write-up to himself and to one other person, an old colleague named Frank Delgado, who had left Meridian 2 years earlier and now worked compliance at one of the client banks. He did not do it to go around anyone. He did it because at 4 a.m, running on nothing, the engineer in him said, "Get the proof out of this building." Then he meant to print the summary, walk it into Whitfield's office the moment she arrived, and refuse to leave until she looked at it. He sat down at his desk to wait. He put his head down for 1 minute. He did not wake up when the floor filled with people. He did not wake up when Mercer walked past and saw him there and felt the cold relief of a man whose problem has just solved itself. He did not wake up until Sandra Whitfield stood over him with a board member at her shoulder and said the words, "This is exactly the kind of thing I'm cleaning up here. Pack your desk. You're done. Now you are back where we started." But you know what Whitfield does not. You know what is in the bag at his feet. Theodore lifted his head. His cheek had the texture of the keyboard printed into it. For a moment, he did not know where he was, and then he saw Whitfield's face, and the board member behind her, and Mercer standing a careful 10 feet away with his arms crossed, and he understood that he had run out of time in the worst possible way. "Sandra," he said. His voice came out wrecked. "There's a problem with the Saturday batch. I have the proof. It's done. I finished it an hour ago." "I'm sure," Whitfield said. She turned to the board member, a heavy-set man named Harold Crane, and gave him the small, tight smile of a woman demonstrating a point. "This is what I mean about culture. We have people sleeping at their desks while the new team carries the load. A few feet away, an engineer named Owen Pruitt stood holding a coffee he had stopped drinking. Owen was 26. He had been at Meridian 14 months, and he was terrified of Whitfield in the uncomplicated way the young are terrified of power. He knew something the rest of the floor did not. He had seen Theodore's lights on every night that week. He had seen the foil plate. He had walked past the sandbox branch on the shared monitor Tuesday and seen the words, "Settlement, Failure, Simulation" across the top. And he had said nothing, because saying something meant stepping into the space between Whitfield and the man she had already decided to discard. "Pack the desk," Whitfield said. "Owen, get him a box." Owen did not move. Owen. And here was the moment that cost him. Owen Pruitt was not brave. He spent that whole week being not brave. But he had a younger brother who worked nights stocking shelves and slept through morning classes. And he had once seen that brother accused of being lazy by a man who did not know he worked 2 jobs. And something about Theodore's printed cheek and his wrecked voice landed in that exact place. "He wasn't sleeping because he's lazy," Owen said. His voice was too quiet. He said it again, louder, hating how it shook. "He's been here every night this week. He found something in the settlement code. It's on the shared monitor. I saw it Tuesday." Whitfield's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "Owen, this isn't your concern." "There's a simulation," Owen said. "He built a simulation. It's called settlement failure. I don't know what it means, but he didn't build it for nothing." Theodore was already moving. He pulled the encrypted drive from his bag, and he pulled the printed summary, the one he had run off at 4 a.m, 16 pages of it, and he set it on the desk between himself and Whitfield with the flat of his hand pressed over it. 18 hours, he said. "The Saturday batch runs at midnight. When it runs, it fails. Not slows down. Fails. It will double settle 3 client accounts that are sitting at their credit ceilings, and the cascade will corrupt the entire reconciliation. $500 million. The hospitals don't get paid. The school districts bounce payroll, and there is no clean ledger to walk it back, because the version history that would let you reconstruct the correct numbers was purged 11 days ago." The board member, Harold Crane, who had been wearing the bored expression of a man being given a tour, stopped looking bored. "Purged," Crane said, "under his credentials." Theodore did not point. He did not have to. Everyone on the floor had stopped pretending to work. 2 days after the rebuild, you can check the access log. It's the one log that wasn't touched, because you can't purge the record of your own purge without leaving the record of doing it. Mercer uncrossed his arms. "This is absurd. He's been pulling production data he wasn't authorized to access. I flagged it Wednesday. This is a man covering for the fact that he got caught somewhere he shouldn't be. It was a good move. Theodore had to give him that. It took the true thing, the unauthorized data pull, and wrapped the lie around it." "I pulled read-only logging data," Theodore said, "within my permissions, to build the simulation. You're right that you flagged it Wednesday. You flagged it because you saw me in the settlement code, and you knew what I'd find, and you hoped a flag would get me pulled off it before I finished." He looked at Whitfield. "And it almost worked. You told me Wednesday to stay in my lane and send my concerns to Kevin, the man who wrote the code. You told me to report the fire to the person who set it." Whitfield's face had gone still in a way that was different from her usual command. "Show me the simulation," she said. Not on the shared monitor," Theodore said. "He has admin rights to that environment. I want it run on a machine he can't touch." Crane spoke. "We'll run it in the secure room. Now. Whitfield, get your security lead. Mercer, you stay where I can see you." What followed took 2 hours, and the floor did not empty. Word moved the way it moves, and engineers who should have been at lunch stood in the hall outside the secure room. Theodore ran the simulation on a clean machine with the company's head of security watching the inputs and Harold Crane watching the head of security. He ran it once, and the loop caught, and the batch dissolved on the screen into a smear of phantom numbers. Crane said, "Run it again." He ran it again. It caught. Again! 10 times. It caught 10 times. Then Theodore pulled the access log, the one that could not be purged, and he laid it out line by line. The way you explain a thing to people who need to understand it, but cannot read the language it is written in. Here is the rebuild. Here is the purge of the prior version history, 2 days later, under Mercer's credentials, at an hour when Mercer was the only person logged in. Here is the original architecture, recovered from the export Frank Delgado still had at the client bank. Because the history was purged inside Meridian, but the client bank had its own copy of the settlement specifications from 9 years of clean operation. Here is the proof that the system ran flawlessly for 9 years and broke only after the rebuild. That last piece was the one that changed Crane's face from concern to something colder. Because it meant the story Meridian was selling to its buyers, the story of a decrepit old system saved by a brilliant new team, was a lie. And the lie had a purged version history standing behind it. And a board that signed off on a sale built on that lie would be signing its own liability. "Where is the original specification now?" Crane said quietly. "At the client bank," Theodore said, "with a compliance officer named Frank Delgado, who got my full write-up at 4 o'clock this morning. I sent it to him because I have watched version history get purged, and I do not trust a single copy of anything in this building." The room understood what he had just said. The proof was already outside the walls. It could not be flagged, purged, or packed into a box. Mercer started to speak, and Crane lifted one hand without looking at him. And that small gesture, a board member silencing the principal architect with the back of his hand, told the whole floor which way the ground had tilted. What happened next happened fast. The way these things do once the first stone goes. Mercer was walked out by security that afternoon, his admin credentials revoked before he reached the elevator. The settlement batch scheduled for midnight was halted, and Theodore spent that night, his first real night, rebuilding the rounding logic the way it had run for 9 years, with Owen Pruitt beside him, because Owen asked to stay, and Theodore let him. The batch ran clean at midnight the following Saturday. $500 million settling into the right accounts, the hospitals paid, the school districts solvent, and not one of the people whose paychecks cleared that night would ever know how close it had come. The recovered specification went to the client bank's legal team, and the client bank's legal team called the firm handling Meridian's sale, and the sale, which had been 3 weeks from closing, stopped. The due diligence that followed found the purge, and the purge could not be explained as an accident. And a purge that cannot be explained as an accident on a company being sold is the kind of thing that brings regulators. Mercer was named in the filing. So was Sandra Whitfield, not for ordering the purge, which no one could prove she had done, but for a thing harder to wash off. She had been warned, in plain language, by a senior engineer 3 days before the failure, and her response had been to tell him to report it to the man who caused it, and then to fire him in front of a board member while the proof sat in the bag at his feet. Harold Crane was the one who told her. Crane was not a kind man either, but he was a careful one, and careful men do not forgive being made into the face of a fraud they did not know they were touring. Whitfield's mandate had been to deliver a clean sale. She had delivered a halted sale, a regulatory inquiry, and a story that would attach to her name in every reference call for the rest of her career. She cleared her office on a Tuesday. She did not bring donuts. Now here is where they all are. Sandra Whitfield consults now, when she can find it. She tells the story differently in the version she carries, the one where she was protecting a company from an old employee who had become erratic, and there are people who believe her for the length of a lunch, until they look up the filing. Her husband still teaches chemistry. Her daughter graduated. On the morning she was walked out, the elevator she rode down had a board member in it, and he looked at the floor numbers the whole way. And that silence is the thing she remembers. Kevin Mercer did not work in payment systems again. The thing about purging a version history is that it follows you, because the next company that considers hiring you can be told exactly one fact about you by the people who know, and that one fact is enough. He moved to a different city. He gives presentations with slides that move to smaller and smaller rooms. Owen Pruitt is a senior engineer now. The thing he did, the quiet thing that shook on its way out of his mouth, became the thing other young engineers heard about and a few of them started staying when they should have run. He still works 2 desks down from Theodore. He brought his younger brother to the company's open house, and his brother, the one who slept through morning classes, has an internship now in the very building where Owen once almost stayed silent. Frank Delgado, who kept the old specification at the client bank, was thanked in a way that mattered to him, which is to say, his name is on the compliance record as the person whose retained documentation prevented a $500 million systemic failure. He framed nothing. He simply tells the story accurately when the topic comes up. Lupe still works the night crew. Theodore made sure of one thing when the dust settled. One small thing he had the standing to ask for. The night crew got a real break room, with a microwave that worked and chairs that did not wobble, because a woman had once left 2 tamales on his desk at midnight and told him it was not worth dying for. And she had been right and wrong at the same time. Theodore Banks is the chief architect of Meridian Payment Systems. The title Mercer had been given, principal architect, was retired because the company decided it did not need a word that had been built to make one man look like the future at the expense of a man who already was it. He opened the boxes in his second bedroom that spring. It took him a full Saturday. He found his mother's recipe cards near the bottom in her handwriting, and the one for rice and beans was stained at the corner the way the most used cards always are. He made a habit after that of eating sitting down. That is where the story ends. But I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever been the person in the room who saw the thing no one else saw and stayed quiet? Because you knew that being right would cost you more than being silent? Most of us have. Most of us made the safe choice and told ourselves we would speak up next time. So here is the harder question. When you finally do speak, will you have the proof in the bag at your feet, the way Theodore did? Or will you be hoping the room decides to believe you? Tell me in the comments about a time you saw it coming and no one would listen. I want to read every one of them. If this story held you to the end, subscribe and let me know, because there are people out here who do the essential work in the wiring behind the world, and they deserve to be seen before they have to prove it.